Good morning, friends. We are now trying to know the mythological tales. I think in the last two sessions, I told you some stories from the Indian mythologies. Maybe today we will try to wind up. The discussion on Puranas or the mythological tales, it can go on and on because we have got so many mythologies. There are so many mythologies, there are hundreds of stories. There are hundreds of stories which you find in all these Puranas. If you see the main Puranas themselves, the 18 Puranas I was saying, say they will be of this size, huge, say the volume of those 18 Puranas will be this size. So, the stories in all those things, they are innumerable. And most of these stories, they are basically symbolic in nature or sometimes allegorical in nature. So, we have to see. So, today I will try to just wind up. Maybe I had noted one more story from, say this Srimad Bhagavatam. I told about Bhagavatam. Bhagavatam, it was an epic and also a Purana written by Sage Vyasa. And then I was saying that there are so many stories of the devotees. Basically, Bhagavatam contains lot many stories of various devotees. So here we come across a devotee which is an elephant. A devotee need not be a human being. Devotee is an elephant. Okay, that elephant symbolizes something, I will tell you. So the story is like this. There is an elephant king. That elephant king is so proud, so mighty, and it wields so much of power among its in its herd that it is supposed to be the lord of the entire herd. It has so many female, say companions also. The elephant, the huge elephant, mighty elephant, it has so many female companions. And then it is so proud, it is very living so happily. The story is very small, but the description is quite big. In all these say stories, what happens is, the story may be small, but the description is quite big, because he has to create that whole ambience for the entire story. He has to describe how the elephant is, and how proud the elephant is, and how big the forest is, and what type of forest it is, and what type of say pleasures the chap is undergoing. All these things, there is a huge description. So one day it so happens that this elephant goes to one lake for taking water. Elephants, they go to lakes and then they get into the lakes, then they pour water on one another, and then they really enjoy. They say water sporting animal. Elephant is a water sporting animal. So they just go and then they just go say enter the say lake. So it so happens that there is a huge say crocodile there, and the crocodile, you know, crocodile is supposed to be very strong as long as it is in water. When it comes out, it doesn't have much power. It can even be dragged by a human being. You can catch hold of its tail and then drag it. But then when it is in the water, it has so much of power. It can even pull an elephant. So it is so powerful. So say when the elephant steps in to the say lake, the crocodile catches hold of it. Crocodile catches hold of its foot, and then it tries to pull. And then elephant tries to pull back. So this struggle goes on and on and on. According to the story, it goes on for a few years. The elephant is trying to pull back, the crocodile is dragging, and then it goes on and on. So then the elephant tries its best. It tries its best to pull out, and then it is so indignant, it is so angry that all its might and all its power is not able to do anything. Then suddenly it remembers the God. It remembers the Lord. Oh Lord. Then it talks about the greatness of the Lord, and then it surrenders to the Lord. So at that time, okay, the Lord comes out, and then there is a description of what is the Lord. Description of Vishnu who is in heaven. Vishnu is supposed to be in his Vaikuntham. Vaikuntham is the place, which is the name, which is again a symbolic place. And Vishnu is in his Vaikuntham. He is having a nice chat with his wife, that is Lakshmi. And then he listens to the sorrowful prayer of this elephant. And then he just leaves everything, and then just as he is, he comes out. He doesn't bother for his his vehicle. There is a vehicle. What is this vehicle? His vehicle is Garuda. A very huge bird is his vehicle. He forgets about that Garuda, he forgets about that Lakshmi, and then he just comes running as he is. So that there is again a beautiful description of how that Lord comes out without caring for anything, without taking his weapons, without bothering for his vehicle, and then he just comes running. And then as he comes running, then other things also they keep on, they accompany him. His weapons, they accompany him, the wife accompanies, and everybody accompanies. So then as soon as he comes, then he sends his chakra, his weapon, and then he cuts this crocodile, and then he sees that the elephant is released. So this is the story. This is a nice story for a kid. But then this is called Gajendra Moksham. It is a very, very famous passage in this Srimad Bhagavatam. Gajendra Moksha. Gajendra means the king elephant. Gajendra, Gaja plus Indra, the king elephant. Moksham means the release. A release of that king elephant. What release from what? A release from that crocodile. Then what does it symbolize? So a story, if you tell this story to a 5-year-old child, that 5-year-old child also, if you see the entire, read out the entire description of that say passage. The passage is in say which volume of Bhagavatam? I think it is in the 7th volume of Bhagavatam. Bhagavatam is in 12 volumes. It is in one of those volumes, 7th volume. So there, if you read out the description is so catchy that even a 5-year-old, 10-year-old child, a boy, he also enjoys. And then a devotee, a grown-up devotee, okay, oh, you have to surrender to God. This is basically he sees the principle of surrender to God. One has to realize that a man is not, a human being is not very powerful, and then you have to surrender to God. A philosopher also enjoys. So that is the story. That is the story. What is the symbolism here? The elephant, the huge elephant which thinks no end of itself. That is a human being with all his arrogance, with all his pride about one's own achievements. So that that symbolizes pride. And then elephant basically it devotes pride, egotism, and also indulgence in worldly pleasures. You can show that say slide. This indulgence in sensual pleasures, because it has got all his say female elephants which are accompanying him, and then it is sporting with them. So all that sensual pleasures. Then what is the lake? That lake it symbolizes samsara. It symbolizes his samsara, the world. And then the crocodile is that infatuation. Crocodile is the infatuation. The infatuation that is it cannot come out. The elephant is so deeply involved in its samsara. It is so deeply caught, and it is the bondage. It is basically the bondage. What we call bondage in Vedanta is that crocodile. That crocodile symbolizes the bondage, the human bondage as we call it. This bondage in the form of a crocodile it catches, and this elephant struggles and struggles forever for a long time, but then it cannot pull himself out. So then at last he has to surrender to the God, surrender to the Almighty, and then the Almighty releases him from the clutches of that bondage. So the whole overall story is about the human egotism, pride, and indulgence in sensual pleasures, and then inability to free himself from the bondage. The inability to free himself from the bondage on his own, and then he seeks some divine help, and then the God interferes, and then he releases the elephant from this sort of bondage. It is a very, very small story, but this story is actually Gajendra Moksha. It is some Parayana is done, because there is a very wonderful description of the Lord. What exactly is the nature of the Lord? So what exactly is the nature of the deity? So there is a philosophical passage. What Gajendra says is not an ordinary prayer for his release from the crocodile. So it is the highest level prayer, highest level say praise, almost equal to any sort of Vedic say sukta. It is like that. It is almost equal to any Vedic sukta. The praise is it is so full of the dense philosophy, deep philosophy is there in that. So at various levels one enjoys this particular story. So like this we see that the Puranas, they contain so many stories, and then we have to look at them as some allegorical tales. Then we'll try to conclude. Now that I have told about 5 or 6 stories, we can keep on telling the stories, but simple narration of the stories may not be so good unless I read out those whole passages. You will enjoy those stories if I read out those passages. I think even earlier I told about the books which the parents may see. The Bhagavatam, there is a fairly good summary of Bhagavatam by this Ramakrishna Mission people also. There is one lady called Kamala Subramaniam. Kamala Subramaniam, she has written the whole Mahabharata, Ramayana and also Bhagavatam in some sort of prose, in some prose form. That is also a good volume, a fairly big volume, and contains almost the whole story of the Bhagavatam. So unless I read out those passages, you may not feel the beauty. You may not see that get the entire feeling. So I request that the parents may see those books, so that they can also have an idea of what exactly is there in that. Then Puranas, let us try to conclude. So one has to repeatedly tell oneself that these are not cock and bull stories, and these are not some useless stories told for kids. These are basically philosophical or moral ideas which are contained in the form of a tale. You can come to the next slide, Puranas conclusion 1. So these are basically, they depict some philosophical or moral ideas. So then again, if we have to see what we have seen, if we want to recall, I told you that the sage Vyasa has given one formula in the beginning of Mahabharata. In the beginning of Mahabharata, sage Vyasa gives a formula as to what is the nature of this Purana, or what is the nature of this mythology. So he has said, Itihasa Puranabhyam Vedam Samupa Brahmayet. So that is what is the formula given by him. So that what he says is, Veda is there as something as the textbook law text. And then this Purana and Itihasa, they are like case laws. They are like illustrations. Because the law text may define what is an offense. But then okay, the law text says, okay, this is what is meant by pride. This is meant by sensual indulgence. This is meant by arrogance. So it may give some sort of description. But then the Purana has to give an illustration. It has to illustrate how it takes place and in what subtle manner all these subtle forms are there of pride, arrogance and all these things. So all these things are illustrated in a beautiful way in these Puranas. So that is what we see. And then if you ask me what are these philosophical ideas, we have seen some of those philosophical ideas such as Shakti sitting on Shiva. I told about the symbolism of Lalita. Whoever has seen that Lalita photograph, you recall that Shiva is reclining on a bed and Lalita is sitting on him. So what does it mean? The pure consciousness has no movement in it. Pure consciousness, what we call Brahman, supreme reality is pure consciousness only. And in that consciousness, there is a creative power or creative energy, as we call it. And that creative energy is this Shakti. This Shakti, we visualize it as Maya, we call it Prakriti or Maya, you call it Shakti, whatever it is, and then all types of God forms which a human being visualizes, they are in that form. They are in that Shakti only. That particular Shakti which manifests in that, say, consciousness is what we call an empirical God. So this Shakti sitting on Shiva is a philosophical idea. Then again I told about this churning of milk ocean. Milk ocean, you don't visualize any milk, there cannot be any milk ocean. Then the person who wrote this Purana was not a madcap. He was writing he was using it as a metaphor. So this milk ocean is nothing but the human mind. And I told you the meaning of Deva and Asura. Deva, it comes from the root Div. Div means to shine. Shine means brilliance. Brilliance means intelligence. Div is intelligence, some positive idea. And then Asura. Asura means indulging in sensual pleasures. The meaning of Asura is Asushu Ramante, that is indulge in sensual pleasures. So on one side you have got some intelligent aspect of your personality, the other side of your personality is drawing towards sensual pleasures. There is a battle between them. And when this battle takes place, when this struggle takes place, this manthana takes place, then these evil forces are vanquished and then you get this Amruta. Unless there is churning, Sometimes the good forces may win, sometimes the bad forces may win. So it can go on like that. But then if this churning takes place, that is, you have to verify, you have to do viveka. Viveka means discrimination. A proper discrimination is what is called churning. In that discrimination, you eliminate the bad ideas and then keep the good things with you, and that is what is that nectar. That is what is the nectar which gives happiness to a human being. And similarly, we saw the story of this Bali and Vamana. This Bali and Vamana is egotism. Bali symbolizes that egotism again. Thinking that he himself is the doer. And there is nothing called supreme, he himself is the doer. Then the Vishnu has to come in the shape of, take an avatara and then come and then show him that it is the supreme is there and it is not the human being who is the supreme. So that is another thing. We also saw the case of Prahlada. Prahlada means, the meaning, the very word is, it means happiness. All these names are also significant. The very name, the name indicates the character. The name symbolizes the basic, the characteristic of a particular character. So Prahlada itself means happiness. So happiness and Hiranyakashipu. That gold, Hiranyakashipu means gold mattress. The man who always wraps himself up in gold. So happiness and this sort of greed cannot go together. So that is why there is a conflict. So then again, the Lord intervenes and then He preserves happiness and removes that greed and avarice. So that is what we see in that, the story of Prahlada. Then, for example, there are some other things which I can also say. For example, Lord Shiva, the symbolism of Shiva. Of course, there is no slide for this. Symbolism of Shiva. There is a Purana called Skanda Purana. And I think I told you the story of the marriage of Shiva and Parvati. The marriage of Shiva and Parvati. Because the son who is born to Shiva and Parvati alone could kill a particular demon. So that was the situation. So in that situation, so initially this Parvati tries to lure him by her beauty. Then Shiva doesn't get tempted. On the other hand, he opens his third eye, that is eye of that knowledge, and then that Jnana Agni, that fire of knowledge, it goes and kills that lust called Kama. Kama, otherwise called lust. So which means that the human relationship should not be dominated by lust. It should be dominated by love. It should be dominated by pure understanding. It should be dominated by an ethical principle and not merely lust. So, but anyway, thereafter, what does this Parvati do? Parvati goes and then she does penance. She does some tapas. Did I tell you that aspect of story? So she does some tapas. Then again, Shiva tries to test her, whether she has attained that level of maturity, that level of purity of mind. The man and woman meeting also, it is a question of purity of mind. So there, Shiva tests her. He goes in the guise of a brahmachari. He goes in the guise of a handsome young man and then tries to tempt her. And then that fellow asks, what is the greatness you see in Shiva? After all, I see, you look at me, I am more handsome, I am more eligible, I am a great eligible bachelor. What is that Shiva? He is a naked chap Shiva is supposed to be naked. Shiva is supposed to be naked. He is supposed to be sitting on a horse. So not horse, on a bull. Shiva is sitting on a bull. And then he always roams around in Smashana, that is a graveyard. Then this is the description of Shiva. And he also holds a trident. You know what is a trident? There are 3 prongs to one huge long rod he carries. There are 3 prongs. So that is what is called a trident or called Trishula. So this is the description of this Shiva. What is it that you find in him? So then this lady replies, "Oh foolish Brahmin, it is not so. Oh foolish young man, Shiva doesn't mean that he is a naked person. Digambara. Digambara is the word Sanskrit. Word Digambara means naked. What is the meaning of Digambara? One who has you see, you and I, we are all limited people, limited personalities, and then we have to clothe ourselves. We have to clothe ourselves with some external clothing. You imagine something which is infinite. You imagine something which is infinite, which is all pervading. then where are the clothes for it? There cannot be any clothes for that. It can be clothed, it can't be enclosed. Something which is limited can be enclosed. Something which is unlimited, something which is infinite cannot be enclosed. So she says, from that, it is from a line from Skanda Purana, Sarvam Jagadyasya Rupam Digvasah Parikirtitah. Digvasah, that is all the directions. You call it east, north, west, south, whatever you call, up, down, whatever you call, all these, the whole thing, beyond our, beyond what we can perceive. So that is he pervades the whole thing. So the direction itself, whatever you visualize, that itself is the dress for him. Digvasaha, Digambaraha. Digambara means naked. The literal meaning of Digambara is the one who has all the directions as his clothes. So wherever you see, he is there. So to you visualize the end of that direction, there cannot be any end. And then what does it mean? This Trishula, this trident, Gunatrayamayam Shulam, Gunatrayamayam. We came across Sattva, Rajas and Tamo Gunas when we described, when I told you the nature of this creation, etc. I told about these three gunas, the three tendencies in nature. One is called Sattva, one is called Rajas, and one is called Tamoguna. So that gives rise to different human types, that also I told. So this Gunatraya, these three gunas, these three characteristics, they are called the three gunas, they are the Shula, Trishula. That is, these are the three things which prod a person, which prod a human being. Sometimes the Sattva is dominant, sometimes Rajas is dominant, sometimes Tamas is dominant. These are the three things which prod a human being. So that is why it is called Trishula. Shula means something which gives pain, Shula. So the head Shula, we say Shula means something which is painful. Trishula, three types of pain. That is, all these three gunas, they are painful. So that is why we are supposed to go beyond these three gunas. That is what Gita also says. So we are supposed to go beyond these three gunas and discover our real nature. So that is what it says. Then what is this bull? The bull on which he sits is Vrusho Dharma iti proktaha tamarudhas tato vrushi. That line says Vrushaha is that bull. What that bull symbolizes? The Dharma. Dharma means, I told you about the cosmic order. The cosmic order itself is Dharma. So he is the one who maintains that cosmic order. He is the one who controls the whole cosmos. So that cosmic order is under him. So that is why he is supposed to be, or represented to be, or depicted to be sitting on a bull. So there is a symbolism. There is a symbolism for Shiva. And similarly, if you see, there is a symbolism for Vishnu. If you see Vishnu Purana, there is a similar symbolism. I am not going into that because you can go on and on to tell about this symbolism. Then again, these images of gods, if we see, you can come to the next slide. The physical images of God. So suppose you to go to a Vishnu temple. So Vishnu is there with 4 hands. And there is a mace in one hand, there is some other sword in one hand, and then one hand says like this, and one hand shows like this. What does that symbolize? And then again, if you see Lord Venkateshwara, he has got one wife on one side, another wife on one side. And you can't say, oh, our God is great, our God has 2 wives, etc. It was good or good. So in olden days, probably people used to accept, but now it is a very, very unacceptable idea for a modern man. So not only that, what does it symbolize? Actually, what does it symbolize? So if we see what exactly is how these images, how these pictures have come into existence, I was telling you, the initial idea, the earlier slides we saw, are we idol worshippers? We saw that slide also earlier. So there I told you, the idea of God becomes the idol of God. The idea of God becomes the idol of God. This idea of a God, or a God means a particular divine aspect. The idea of a particular divine aspect is contained initially in a mantra. Some Vedic mantra is there. So that Vedic mantra, the Rishi or somebody, suppose a devotee. A devotee, he wants to worship Vishnu. So he wants to worship Vishnu, and then he takes that mantra, and then he visualizes that mantra. And then this mantra is in some ancient Sanskrit. Somebody writes some Dhyana Shloka. Dhyana Shloka means, okay, for example, if you talk about Gayatri, there is a shloka. Mukta vidruma hemani lathavalachya etc. etc. There is a shloka. So somebody he writes a shloka. So in that form, you visualize that form in the mind. So in Indian tradition, this visualization and meditating on a particular God form is something which is unique. In other traditions, you just go to a place of worship. You say, okay, that priest or whoever it is, he reads some prayer, and then you come over. This tradition of sitting alone, sitting in an isolated place, meditating on the particular God form and trying to be that God form. This is another unique thing. Trying to become that God, trying to be that God is something which is unique. This upasana is something which is described in our Upanishads. There are different types of upasanas. Upasana means meditating on the simple meaning of upasana is meditating on a God form. So this meditation is at different levels. One is meditating as though you are a devotee and there is a God in front of you. So you are visualizing Vishnu, and then there is a God in front of you with these divine aspects, and then you are doing worship. Then there is another form, another way of worship, that is, I visualize myself as becoming that God. This is called Aham Graho Upasana. This type of Upasana, you find lot many of these upasanas in our Upanishads. For example, Chandogya Upanishad. There is one Upanishad called Chandogya Upanishad. It is full of these upasanas. So you are trying to visualize and you are trying to become that particular God, that particular divine aspect. This is a very, very unique thing which you don't find in any other tradition. Becoming God and then trying to behave like that particular God, not putting on some say crown and not like that, visualizing only the characteristics. So that sort of thing, and achieving that level of purity. So that is the point. So that is what we see in our tradition. So that is why this mantra, whatever mantra is there in the Veda, that becomes the original form of the God. Then we also saw that for the purpose of worship, etc., somebody has made a small, say some idol type of thing. Suppose you visualize, you want to see about, you talk about Brahma. So we see, for example, in say in the universe, we talk about what is called Srushti, Sthiti, Laya. That is creation, sustenance of the universe, and then dissolution of the universe. All these three things take place because this Srushti, this creation is not a one-time affair in our tradition. This Srushti goes on and on and on. So creation takes place, it sustains for some time, then again it is resolved back into that, say, what we call this Maya. And then again another Srushti is there. So it goes on and on. So Srushti you visualize as a particular God. That is called Brahma. And for purpose of creation, one should be intelligent. That intelligence is what is symbolized in the 4 Vedas. So it's 4 Vedas. They are said to be the 4 heads of that particular, say particular divine aspect. And we give the name, some called some Srushtikarta. That Srushtikarta Brahma. This Brahma is different from the Supreme Brahman. So this Srushtikarta Brahma has got 4 heads. Then he needs intelligence to create, isn't it? So intelligence is his Shakti. Intelligence is his power. So that intelligence is visualized as his consort. Consort means a wife. And that wife's name is Saraswati. Saraswati, say in fact, of course, I don't want to go into the other say mythologies. In the Christian mythology, if you go, Abraham and Sarah, Brahma and Saraswati, this same thing has gone, the Vedic metaphor has gone into the Jewish say story also. So anyway, that we have to see how this, when and how this Vedic symbol has gone into Jewish mythology, we do not know, because there is a theory that the Jews, they were nothing but our own Yadus. There is what is called Yadava clan. If you see these mythologies, in these mythologies, there are stories about how various say clans they developed, how various clans got distributed all over. So one particular clan, this Yadava clan moved that direction. That Yadava clan is supposed to be, we call it Yahudi. Yahudi is same as Yadava, and they are the Jews. So there is a theory like that. We do not know, unless there is some good research done into this. We do not know, we can't establish. So anyway, this creator is said to be having a consort called Saraswati. Then for sustenance of this universe, who is in charge? Vishnu is supposed to be the man who is in charge of sustenance of the universe. So Vishnu, for him, what is required for sustenance? You have to give food, you have to give all material comforts, you have to give all wealth, money, all these things, bank balance, etc., you have to give. Then for that, what is needed? What is needed is wealth. And wealth is supposed to be his power, that is what is called Lakshmi. So that is why Vishnu's wife is Lakshmi. Then because Vishnu sustains this earth, and earth is symbolized as another woman, earth is called Bhudevi, we call it Bhudevi. So there is one side Sri Devi and the other side Bhudevi. This wealth is given to this Bhudevi, this all the people living on earth. So this is his symbolism. So if you come across Venkateshwara having Sri Devi on one side and Bhudevi on the other side, the symbolism is the Vishnu who symbolizes this divine aspect of sustaining the universe. That wealth which is required, which is needed to sustain the wealth is shown as symbolically as one woman, and this woman who is supported, she is shown as another woman, because he sustains her, sustains the earth, earth is shown as his wife. Then similarly in the case of dissolution of this whole thing, the whole thing has to be resolved back. So that is what is called Rudra. Rudra needs another Shakti, a fierce form which totally wraps up the whole thing, which resolves the whole thing, and that is what we call it Durga or Kali, a very, very fierce form of the same divine. So like this, all these divine forms we have to visualize, and then we should not say very casually say, oh, our God is great, our God has 2 wives, etc. We should not say like that. So anyway, we'll continue next. Thank you.